Hey guys, for those of you who know and for those who have yet to hear, Amazon has recently announced that they've purchased the rights for a television series for The Lord of the Rings. To be precise, they've said it will concern events that predate those of the trilogy. In today's episode, we'll simply be looking at the potential material they could cover and some pros and cons of each. It goes without saying that there will be spoilers for potential plotlines, just to warn you in advance. So let's see what material might be available. We're told that the series will be covering unexplored stories that precede the events of the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, whether this means that timelines in between The Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring might be explored is unclear and up for debate. However, I feel they chose to relate it to the Fellowship of the Ring, as it's a much more critically acclaimed and prestigious project, while The Hobbit did have some bad press compared to it. However, let's look at what events occur between these two, and if any of them could truly be worthy of a multi-season series. So during this time period, the three main things I could see them possibly focusing on are Aragorn's youth, his coming of age and story, the wars and skirmishes that Gondor fought against Mordor, especially around the area of Osgiliath, and the dwarven expedition that was led by Balin to reclaim Moria. It's possible that it could include all three of these events since the time periods in which they occur overlap a bit. However, realistically, I think they'll avoid this part of the timeline for several reasons. Firstly, once they cover these topics, they'll reach a dead end, as they can't retell the story of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings, since these have already been produced recently. Secondly, in my opinion, it would be a very risky gamble on their part. The characters involved in these stories, such as Aragorn, Gandalf, Boromir, Elrond, Arwen, Balin, and Gollum, they're all characters that we've already seen on screen, and Amazon would have to recast these beloved characters despite the connection we share with the original actors. So seeing someone different play them might instantly draw us away from them due to nostalgia, and therefore it would be much safer to pick a timeline that avoids this. Finally, Amazon said that they hope this series will be the next Game of Thrones. Now, the way I understand this is that it doesn't mean they want to copy its style or character, but instead they want this series to involve a grand scale of events, political intrigue, grand battles and all that. And sure, there is some of this in the possible plots that I've mentioned. However, they pale in comparison to some of the other timelines in the books, and so I feel it's more likely that one of these is chosen instead. Now, the other possible timelines that they might cover are either found in the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, or in the appendices of The Return of the King. The Tolkien estate had only sold the film rights to The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, while they retained the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, which is why these two have never been used or put to screen. Christopher Tolkien, Tolkien's son, was the head of the Tolkien estate, and he was completely against selling the film rights for the other books, as he was very displeased with how the films turned out. However, apparently, Christopher Tolkien is no longer the head of the Tolkien estate, as he resigned on the 31st of August without any announcement. We also know that Amazon paid $250 million for the rights to the material for this series, and it could very well be that this new head of the Tolkien estate was much more open to selling the rights of the Silmarillion and other books. However, at the same time, as far as I know, the rights to produce a film and the rights to produce a television series are sold separately, in which case Amazon would have had to negotiate with the Tolkien estate to simply produce a series on the events of The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, or the stories in the appendices, since these are included in the book of The Return of the King. And so, I'll be breaking down the potential plots from these three sources: the appendices, the Silmarillion, and the Unfinished Tales. So the appendices have an incredible amount of information, and they concern some very interesting events. I also feel it's most plausible that the series will cover timelines from the appendices. Keep in mind that there are other stories in them which I won't be covering, as I don't feel they have enough plot and intrigue to sustain a multi-season television series. So the first possible plot I saw could involve the story of Earl the Young, the first king of Rohan, we could see how he led his people to find land in the north and their skirmishes with what remained of the forces of Angmar. How Gondor was being attacked by Easterlings and Orcs before Earl the Young came to Gondor's aid, leading an army of Rohirrim. The Battle of the Field of Celebrind and the foundation of the realm of Rohan. During this period in Middle-earth's history, we're also told how attacks on Gondor led to Osgiliath falling to the enemy, and of orcs making strongholds in the Misty Mountains, while Sauron began to populate Moria with his minions. There could be a strong premise from all of this, and they could involve many factions that we're familiar with, along with other races such as dwarfs and elves. Now its potential plot isn't as strong as the next few that I'll be discussing, as I feel they're more interesting. However, it has the advantage that it occurs in a short time frame of less than 100 years, and so would be able to follow several characters on their journey, since most of these events would occur in one lifetime. The next possible plot concerns Numenor, its rise and fall. Now this would have a lot of political intrigue, and it's a very interesting point in Middle-earth's history. The only downside to it is that it occurs over 3,000 years, with many years between its rise and fall being quite uneventful. There were, after all, 25 kings of Numenor. However, I can see this issue being avoided if they use a prologue to explain and give the backstory for the majority of these years, and only focus on the reign of the last two kings, Tar-Palantir and Ar-Pharazôn. With Tar-Palantir would see the last attempt of a Numenor king to redeem himself for his people's past mistakes, as throughout the years they had distanced themselves from the Valar. This would follow with his death, and how his nephew, Ar-Pharazôn, usurped the throne of Numenor. We could then see Ar-Pharazôn's attack on Sauron and Sauron's surrender, before all of this culminates in the downfall of Numenor. This part would also focus heavily on Isildur and Elendil, the faithful of Numenor, and how they avoided the fall of Numenor by remaining loyal to the Valar. We could then see how they established the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor in Middle-earth, and all the events that lead up to the last alliance. This would allow the series to be highly focused on several characters, and I think it has the most potential if they choose to settle with Numenor. The other option is if they focus on all the years of Numenor, and therefore this could include the defeat of Morgoth, the forging of the Rings of Power, the Numenorian settlements in Middle-earth, and their diplomatic relations with the natives of these lands. This also has potential to be very interesting. However, I feel the story would progress at a very slow pace, and since it would occur over several thousands of years, our characters would pass away from old age, along with the producers needing to explain the passage of time. I just feel it wouldn't work out well, at least not as well as the first option I mentioned. The next possible plot from the appendices is the history of the realm of Arnor. Again, this has the issue that it occurs over around 600 years. We could see the breakup of Arnor into the three kingdoms of Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudar. This would be followed by the Witch King's arrival to Angmar and his attacks on these kingdoms. There's loads of history and political intrigue to be explored here, and they could also simultaneously show us some of the problems the southern kingdom of Gondor was experiencing, such as its civil war, its battles with the Corsairs, Haradrim and Wain Riders, the Great Plague that had swept the land, along with the Prince Eärnur being sent to aid Arnor. Also, towards the end of this period, we could also see the awakening of the Balrog and the fall of Moria, which eventually leads to the foundation of the Dwarven Kingdom of Erebor. They might also choose to include the Nazgûl besieging Minas Ithil, which falls and is conquered to become Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. We'd be able to follow the stories of all these different realms and races, which I'm sure would be awesome. But again, they'd have to see how to deal with the passage of time. The next possible plot is very similar to the previous one, but instead it would mainly focus on the southern kingdom of Gondor. I'll just talk about this briefly, as it ties in with my last point. This plotline would cover the Civil War, the Great Plague, and the Gondorian skirmishes with the Easterlings, Haradrim, Corsairs, and Wayne Riders. There are 2 more potential plot lines that I can see them adapting from the appendices. There's the story of Helm Hammerhand, where we could simultaneously see Rohan's battles with the wild men of Dunland, and the other is the history of Durin's folk, though the latter is quite uneventful, and so I think it's much less likely, as the more interesting parts have either been covered in The Hobbit, or they wouldn't be long enough to be the focus of a series such as the Battle of Moria and the story surrounding it. So on to the Silmarillion. Now the Silmarillion is a great book, there is no doubt about that, but portraying it as a series has quite a few hurdles. Firstly, the Silmarillion is a collection of stories involving different characters, factions, and time periods, and most of these are disjointed. I also doubt that they would cover the Silmarillion from the start of the book, as I imagine it would be very difficult to portray the music of the Ainur, and I can't see the Valar being portrayed as humans, though I could be proven wrong. I think they're more likely to pick a certain character or faction and follow their plot. These are the ones I think have the most potential. So there's the story of Feanor and his sons, or the Noldor, their journey starting from Valinor to their emigration to Middle-earth, as they chase after Morgoth for the Silmarils. The story of Beren and Lúthien, Doriath and its fall, or the events surrounding the elven city of Gondolin and the children of Húrin. All of these have intriguing stories, and could almost work as standalone plots for a series. Since Amazon mentioned that there's also potential for spin-off series, these other stories in the Silmarillion could easily be separate entities. Finally, regarding the Unfinished Tales, most of it covers material that's also included in the other books, such as the Rings of Power, Húrin, and the story of Cirion and Earl. There's also information about the hunt for the ring, and the quest of Erebor, but I can't see either of these 2 being relevant, since they mostly tie in with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit respectively. I'd like to make one last point, that out of all of these, making an adaptation of the Children of Húrin might be less likely, as a story it's quite negative compared to the others, and it might not work as well as a series. Some viewers might find it off-putting, so I'm not sure whether Amazon would take the risk. So this wraps up the video, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you agree with me or disagree with me, drop a comment below. I'd like to know if you think I missed some plotline and your opinion on the potential plots I've mentioned. If you can, leave a like, cause it helps this channel greatly. And if you're new here, subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we can once again explore the wonderful world and lore of Middle-earth.